This is probably an area that is not talked about very much, but I think it's important and also quite interesting to take a look at how we think about risk management in Agile. If you've watched a video that I made, excuse me, quite a while back, The Art of Governance in the Age of Agile, what you will know is that governance is built into Agile ways of working. And as we will see here, risk management is actually built in to our ways of working. So if we just consider, we've seen this already, but let's just have another look at it. If we consider risk over time on a traditional project, we only really properly mitigate everything right at the end, because that is when we have finally delivered the big bang approach to the project, and we finally put it in front of a user, in front of the stakeholders, and well, we know what happens there. With Agile, of course, we are mitigating risk right from the very beginning, and we'll look at a little bit about why that is in just a second. But I came across this, which was, I thought, quite interesting. Disciplined Agile Consortium produced this as a way of explaining how risk gets mitigated early in Agile projects. One of the reasons is that we are obviously delivering value early, so we're building those things that deliver the most value. We're putting those in front of a user, in front of customers, in front of stakeholders, and we can see that we have mitigated the risk right there. And regardless of what it is that we're building, if we're doing that, that really helps. The other thing that we're doing is, of course, we're experimenting because we know there's so much uncertainty. So what we do is we experiment as much as we can to prove or disprove any hypotheses that we have. And that, of course, all reduces risk. Really interesting website, agileriskmanagement.org, and I'll put the link obviously below as well. But they've got some very interesting material in there, which is worth spending a bit of time looking at if you would like to. I'm going to try and summarize that here. So the four areas of risk management: we identify the risks, assess them, obviously how do we respond, and how do we review? How do we do this in an agile way? So risk identification is happening daily because we have stand-ups, we have daily stand-ups. So it is something that is ongoing all the time. So we spot risks very, very quickly, very, very early, and we then don't have to wait a long time to talk about them because, of course, we will get right onto it in Agile. If we find a risk, we want to get on with it. We might try, if we're going to assess the risk, we'll probably use a traditional matrix, the probability versus impact matrix that we're all used to seeing. But again, remember, it's individuals and interactions over processes and tools, and it's we don't want too much about extensive documentation. We want to actually look at the results of things. So we wouldn't want to spend too much time sort of recording things, although we do want to record them. But again, we don't need to make it all too fancy or spend too much time on that because we can very quickly deal with it. How do we deal with them? Well, we're going to run experiments rather than avoid, exploit, transfer, etc., the traditional way of looking at risks. With Agile, we will just run an experiment to see if we can mitigate it, if we can disprove it, or whatever. And again, the reviewing should be happening on a daily basis, rather than a weekly or a fortnightly really heavy meeting where we sit through all that list of things. We're just ticking them off as we go very, very quickly, which makes it a lot easier, a lot more exciting to do. Again, the same website looks at just a few, in a nutshell, a few ways of looking at risk. The traditional approach. One of the reasons why with Agile we don't have these problems is we don't have those long planning cycles and long development cycles, so we're not worried about extensive complexity because we're dealing with what we know, we're getting facts, we're getting feedback, and so on. Of course, testing generally, with a traditional pure waterfall approach, testing will happen towards the end of the project, whereas we know with Agile, we're testing throughout. And in fact, testing should be built into the planning And when something is being built, it should be built to the test plan so that we know the results that we're going to get, and we're not building something and then figuring out how we're going to test whether what we built is good. Obviously, responsiveness to change. When we think about Agile, we think about being highly responsive to change and so forth. We know that already. That's an obvious part of it. But the other thing is that what we don't look for, in fact, it's interesting that most frameworks don't talk about risk management as such, because the sense is that it's actually built in, as we saw on the previous slide. It's actually built into there, so it's not a prescriptive approach. The other thing is we want the teams to react and respond depending on the relevance of risk to the project that they're on. So just a very quick idea there, a very quick set of ideas to help us understand why risk management is built in to our Agile ways of working. This is another, again, we'll put this into the links below, another way of looking at it in a little bit more detail. I'm not going to sort of spend too much time on this because you can look it up yourself, but again, just worth reading to give ourselves that confidence and that comfort that we don't have to spend all those hours and all that time worrying about risk. Ultimately, if we're doing Agile right, the risk that we have is really only for the next 2 weeks. If we're running in 2-week sprints, the major risk is that something will go wrong in the next 2 weeks, but we'll be able to catch that, pick it up, and deal with it, which is why we believe that risk is almost eliminated by inspecting and adapting, by looking at things on a regular basis, and of course through increased transparency. Obviously, we're gaining product value early. In fact, almost immediately. Coming out of the very first sprint, we should be delivering something of value so that we can see that we can immediately start mitigating risk, start earning money from whatever it is that we're building. We've talked about this already. Testing happens as we're going through the development phases. It's not a big surprise at the end, and then we have to go back and fix a whole bunch of stuff. It shouldn't be like that at all. We obviously accommodate new priorities. And again, one of the reasons why costs of Agile projects don't balloon is because when a new feature comes in, a new requirement comes in that becomes urgent, it becomes important, and we need to put that in. What we do is we then replace out something which is of less value. So in traditional project management, we will tend to say, right, we need a change request, and now the cost is, we're always ratcheting up the thing, the product and the costs. With Agile, we say, right, we know we've got a fixed time, we know we've got a fixed cost, a fixed budget. What moves is the features which are there to deliver the outcome. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, you want this new thing? Fantastic. Which one of these are we going to take off, put to the bottom of the product backlog list, because we are not now planning to deliver that. And that's the general principle of how we approach these things. Of course, one of the fun parts that we learn at the beginning of Agile, at the beginning of our Agile journey, is this idea that all that planning that we used to do at the beginning of a project was all done when we had the least amount of information about what it is that we're actually doing. Which is why, again, I'm not a big fan of a sprint 0 or sprint -1 and so forth. I want to get started right away. I want to do enough planning so that the team can get moving, so that we can start getting feedback. We can start figuring things out. Whilst the team is working, we then have time. The product owner, the scrum master, the executives, the sponsors all have time then to plan what's going to happen over the coming sprints. But let's get started so that we can actually start moving, not spending too much time when we know the least amount about anything. Well, you can read that there for yourself. Basically, the other what this is saying is the other principle is that the product owner is a single person, not a committee. So we don't have competing requirements and visions and so on when we're doing this. Again, all of that will reduce risk massively. And then finally here, this idea that we have access to the decision maker. The product owner needs to be available at all times. We don't have a situation where we're waiting for an unresponsive stakeholder or an absent stakeholder to tell us, whether or not we can continue with what we're doing. So there are some ideas again about why it is that it's less risky. How do we approach this? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Let me just finish this bit off quickly. So some techniques that we can use for risk management, but the one that really stands out there is this idea: identify and discuss. Talk about things, sit down and let's discuss them, rather than spending all that time recording things and trying to figure out whether is it a 5, is it a 4, is it a 3, and so on. Just let's talk about it, let's run an experiment, and let's fix it. The reason why this all works then is because, obviously, with Agile, absolutely imperative is that we have full transparency at all times. And that we are inspecting and adapting all the way through the project. So we make absolutely sure that we are not having any surprises as we go through. Not so easy if stakeholders and decision makers are absent, but really easy to manage if we are actually stuck into it right from the beginning. So in summary then, the belief is that risk management is built into Agile ways of working. And obviously, we need to take time to be conscious of it, to be aware of it. And the best way, the thing I was going to mention earlier, one of the best ways of testing this out is, as always, think big, start small, act now. Find a small project that you want to test this on. If you're not ready to get going immediately with a big project, just try these processes with a smaller project where the risk is less probable, less likely, and see whether you can reduce all of that documentation, you can reduce the number of big meetings, and just see how that feels. And then as you gain confidence, you can move on to the next bit. Some ideas there on this. As I say, in Agile, we spend very little time talking about risk management. It comes along when we've got a waterfall or a traditional plan-driven approach, stakeholder involved, and then we need to sort of build all that up and try and do that. But hopefully we can show them very quickly that actually a lot of it is probably not as needed as it might feel at the beginning. Hope this helps.